So our paper is attempting to reconcile the disagreement as to whether we have in fact a savings crisis. So work with Alicia shows that most households are falling short. In contrast, John Carl Schultz reckons that almost nobody is falling short. And Michael Hurd and Suzanne Rohed are analysing consumption data, find little evidence of a sizable decrease in consumption immediately at retirement, which once again is indicative of a lack of a crisis. So what I'm going to do in the next 10 minutes is attempt to reconcile the evidence. And I'm going to start off with some data from the survey of the consumer finances. And what it is, it shows wealth to income ratios for households aged 20 to 22 to 62 to 64 every 3 years from 1983 to 2010. And wealth in this case includes housing equity, it includes 401k plans and non-pension financial assets, but not DB or social security wealth. And the key message is that the lines lie more or less on the top of each other, that 2010 is a little bit high, 2007 is a little bit high, 2010 is a little bit low. The inference I draw from this is that if households were okay back in 1983, if they now have the same wealth to income ratios but don't have a DB pension, have a greater longevity, have lower social security benefits, greater out-of-pocket expenses, worse annuity rates, then they're likely to be less okay now. Now, the next thing I'd like to talk about is the National Retirement Risk Index. And the National Retirement Risk Index measures the percent of working age households who we reckon are on track not to be able to attain a target replacement rate. And what we do, we build a life cycle savings model and calculate age-varying savings rates that will permit households of various types to smooth consumption. And I understand that the smoothing the consumption is not the same as smoothing the marginal utility of consumption. We then take data from the survey of the consumer finances. We forecast wealth to income ratios at retirement. We make an assumption that at the age of retirement, the household goes out and takes out a reverse mortgage and purchases an inflation-indexed annuity. We calculate the household's anticipated replacement rate. We compare it with the target and classify the household at risk if its forecast replacement rate falls short of the target. And what the National Retirement Risk Index shows is that more than 1/2 of working age households are at risk of falling short in retirement. Now, I'd now like to talk very briefly about a study that Alicia and I did using the Health and Retirement Study. And what we did, we calculated the percentages of pre-retirees who'd be unable to attain a target replacement rate if they retired at various ages. And the target replacement rates came from the Retire project conducted by Georgia State University. And the denominator in the replacement rate calculations is the average earnings over the last 10 years. And the message of this figure is that even if households take out a reverse mortgage, even 1/2 will fall short if they retire at 65. So how do we reconcile our conclusions with the more optimistic conclusions of John Carl Schultz and its co-authors? So we started off by having a look at households aged 51 to 61 years old in 1992, one of the age groups studied by John Carl Schultz. Now, he estimated that only 16% of that birth cohort was saving suboptimally. When we ran them through the NRRI algorithm, we estimated that 19%, a very, very similar number, was saving suboptimally. So back in 1992, John Carl Schultz and us agree that there was basically no crisis. Now, when we run it forward to sort of 2004, we have a very, very sharp divergence. So John Carl Schultz estimates that only sort of 5% are saving suboptimally, and we estimate that sort of 35% of people aged 51 to 61 are at risk. So how do we explain the differences? Is one model right, and one model wrong, or are we using different assumptions? Now, we believe that both models are right, but that they are making different assumptions. And one of the sort of the key assumptions is the treatment of children. So in the John Carl Schultz model, the model assumes that households want to have greater consumption when the kids are at home, and lower consumption prior to the kids being at home and after they leave home. In our model, we make an assumption of level consumption throughout the life. The other difference is the treatment of income in retirement. That the National Retirement Risk Index assumes that households go out and purchase an inflation-indexed annuity, and that obviously gives the household a constant level of consumption in retirement. The John Carl Schultz model assumes that the household carries out an optimal drawdown of unannuitized wealth. The household has a preference for a greater consumption earlier in retirement when the household is more likely to be alive. The household optimally spends down all of its wealth by age 88, and at age 88, the household has sold its house, it's living on social security, and living in Section 8 housing. Now, obviously, well, I mean, that's what the model says. Now, the net result is that households need fewer dollars of wealth to generate a declining level of income than to generate a constant level of income. So what we then did, we took the National Retirement Risk Index and we imposed John Carl Schultz's assumptions on it. So we start off originally with 35% at risk. If we impose an optimal drawdown, it goes down to 24% at risk. If we impose an optimal drawdown and children, it goes down to 11.5, which is very, very close to the John Carl Schultz number. So really what it turns on is sort of drawdown and children. Now, the question is, which assumptions are more reasonable? Now, in John Carl Schultz's model, they make an assumption of a relatively rapid sort of drawdown of wealth. Our reading of most household financial planning literature is that most planners assume that households want to have a relatively constant level of the consumption, at least to the ages at which households are reasonably likely to be alive. Now, as for children, I have a paper with Norma Coe that has a relatively small sample size. What we do find is that when the kids leave home, rather than the household cutting back total consumption and holding per capita consumption constant, the household lives it up. And that obviously sets a higher floor for the post-retirement consumption target, and it crowds out retirement saving. Now, a further question is whether the households are able to maintain initial levels of consumption during retirement. And we took Mike Hurd's and sort of Suzanne Rohwedder's model and applied 3 tests. The first test was, do households have enough money to maintain their spending in the first year of retirement throughout retirement? The second is, what happens to actual spending as they age? And the third question is, do households who who have insufficient resources to maintain their initial level of spending cut back consumption as they age. Now, I'm running very, very low on time here. I'm going to tell you what the answers to these questions is. The first answer is that households do not, in fact, have enough money to maintain the level of consumption that the household is enjoying in the first year of retirement, that they are on course to run out of money. The second thing is that there is evidence that households do cut back spending as they age. And the third and most telling point, although it's using a relatively small sample size, is that the households which have insufficient resources to maintain their initial level of the consumption are cutting back consumption by more than the households that have enough to maintain their initial level of consumption. And I'm being sort of held to the wire here. I'd just like to sort of show this little graph which shows the spending of households in the first year of retirement relative to the income, the lifetime income that the households could generate if they made full use of all their resources. And you can see that households in most wealth deciles are in fact on track to run out of money. And then this is a table of the decrease in the consumption by age. As we know, if you are carrying out an optimal drawdown of unannuitized wealth, the annual percentage decrease in the consumption ought to equal the annual mortality risk divided by the intertemporal elasticity of substitution. That is a relatively small number, and it's much smaller than the 26.8% decrease here. I'm out of time. I don't want to be in trouble with Olivia, so I'll thank you for your time.
Thanks.